get a bunch of dropped packets this time or not. Okay, so for those of you who are wondering why we're doing this, in the data science community, like I was kind of previously mentioning, what do we got? I'll give you the quick background. Sometimes I get too long with my long-winded stories. When you're doing any sort of like research, like especially social science research, but any sort of experimental research, a lot of times you're going to deal with a lot of data. So like if I did some sort of experiment where all of a sudden I serve coffee and like I have two sections of a class. In one section I serve coffee and one I don't. And my experiment is that if for the classes where I give people free coffee beforehand, grades improve. And then so we collect data and we go through that whole thing and I perform my experiment and I do statistical testing and there's a lot of statistics involved and do confidence interval and all these other things. And then finally I get some answer out. And then I can validate my study, or we have what's called the null hypothesis. I can confirm or deny it. Now, a lot of that work used to be done in spreadsheets because you'd have, realistically, you'd have some sort of like student collect all the data and look at all the grades and stuff, and they would collect that in Excel spreadsheets, and Excel has some very basic statistical testing, and people got really good at that. But how many people, I don't know if anybody works in an office environment, has anybody dealt with a very unwieldy Excel spreadsheet where it's gotten like massive? Okay, so you're lucky. These things get out of control very quickly. Excel's really bad at documentation. You can name your cells, but how often do people name cells? Like how you can name a cell like, oh, C1, that's supposed to be student number 1, cell C2, that sort of thing. Then you get into the basic, like there's basic problems with Excel. It's very difficult to loop over things. It can't handle matrix algebra, a lot of these things that we like to do in data mining. We like to do a lot of matrix algebra. Now, when I perform that experiment, imagine if it turns out that coffee does boost grades on average by 3% or something, and I say that's statistically significant, and that might be something that we want to do for our morning classes is offer free coffee. Well, what people want to do, I could be just full of it. Some other person in my department might say, okay, this seems a little bit weird. Let me replicate this experiment in my own class, and then I compare two classes. What are they going to do? They're going to want to go back and look at my methodology, because if I want to compare two experiments, they have to be exactly the same. What happens if all my methodology and research and everything is wrapped up in an Excel spreadsheet? Excel spreadsheets have no documentation. It's very difficult sometimes to see what cells do. Sometimes what people will do is they'll do manual offsets and manual hacks and stuff like that, and I just see a number. It's like cell C8 all of a sudden has like, the sum of the first row plus 9. It's like, well, where does that plus 9 come from? So there's this move